Story 1. My wife reveals that she's pregnant, but I know I'm not the father because I'm sterile, so I play along. I 38M. Got married to my wife, 33F, 2 years back. We'd been dating for 3 years, and she was more inclined towards marriage than I was, but just to make her happy, I agreed to it. Around a year ago, we started trying to have a baby again. That was at my wife's insistence. We struggled a lot during the period that we were trying to conceive, though. When things got so bad for my mental health that I decided to go get myself tested, my wife had become mean during the time that we were struggling to conceive, and I tried to deal with her behavior, but it was just too much to bear. So, a few days after the test, I was told by the doctors that I was sterile. To be honest, that pretty much broke my heart. Even though having a baby wasn't my idea, I'd started envisioning my life as a father already, and I really wanted to be one. So, to learn that I'd never be able to be a dad was the most devastating news to me at the time. But the worst was yet to come. I've been trying to work up the courage to tell my wife that I was the reason that we weren't able to conceive, but I was afraid of how she'd react. She'd already been so mean to me that I couldn't imagine her reaction when she found out that what she wanted was probably never going to happen to me. So, I waited for a few days after I knew the results of my test to tell my wife, but she's the one who ended up giving me a surprise. For days after I knew that I was sterile, she sat me down and told me that she had some really important news to share with me. I was extremely scared because I thought that she'd somehow found out about my sterility. But no, she wanted to tell me that she was finally pregnant. I was shocked to my very core at what she was saying, but thankfully, she was blissfully unaware of my true feelings and began to celebrate almost immediately. I tried to join in on her happiness so that she wouldn't doubt me or whatever, but the very next day, I got tested again just to confirm that I was really and truly sterile, and once again I received the same results. I was at a loss because if I wasn't the father, then my wife was most certainly cheating on me. The medical procedures that she needed to conceive artificially were expensive, and since I was the only earning member between the two of us, she couldn't have gotten anything done without asking me for that sort of money first. So, she was obviously cheating. The thought itself was so weird and horrible that I didn't do anything about it for the next few days while my wife planned a full-fledged party to announce her pregnancy. She seemed really happy, and I was equally shattered, but I couldn't let it show on my face because I needed to get to the bottom of this whole situation. I didn't even tell my own family about what was happening and kept it all under wraps because this was way too uncomfortable and personal to be shared with anyone. I couldn't even tell my wife what I thought because, firstly, way too much time had passed, and secondly, I wanted to know who exactly the father of her child was because if I did confront her, then maybe she'd just leave and I'd never know. Luckily, I found out on the day of the party itself. A lot of people attended, including our families, our friends, and a few of my coworkers. She also invited one of our neighbors who lived right across the street from us. Our neighbor, 27M, is a young man and is definitely a lot better looking than me, no doubt not just me, but he's probably better looking than most people since he's a model, but he's still trying to make a name for himself in the modeling world. He moved in with his aunt who owns the house he lives in, so that he's closer to the city since his own family lives really far away. My wife has always had a soft corner for this guy and would cook for him and his aunt when he'd moved in initially. He's even come over to our house for dinner a few times, and we've chatted about his work. He's well-spoken and well-read as well, and he's also a literature major like my wife, so they have a lot in common and hit it off instantly the first time they met. I never had anything against the guy since he seemed sweet enough, and I trusted my wife too. But when he entered the house on the day of our party and my wife's eyes lit up, I could sense that something had changed. She made a beeline for him as soon as he walked in, and they hugged each other for longer than she'd hugged any of the other guests. Nobody else seemed to notice this, but I did. I could tell that they had something brewing, but I just needed a way to confirm it. So, I decided to excuse myself to go to the L, but headed to the bedroom instead and opened up my wife's laptop. I was able to check her phone while she was asleep a few days after she told me she was pregnant, but I didn't find anything suspicious. Getting to her laptop had proved to be a little more difficult since whenever I was home, she was constantly watching something or typing something on it. Whenever I'd ask her what she was doing, she'd turn the screen away from me and tell me that she was working on her novel that had been going on for months. I respected her privacy because I'd actually thought that she was working on a novel. Now the situation had changed, and I was pretty sure that there was no novel and it was just an excuse to hide the contents of her laptop from me. Thankfully, there was no password or anything. I had easy access to it. After some digging, I was able to find another email account in addition to a real one. I switched to that one and went through the emails that had been sent and received. I went through those emails and they were full of confessions of love from my wife and also the other guy, our neighbor. I recognized the email address since he was using his real name, and in the more recent emails, she was telling him that she was pregnant. He didn't take it kindly and was upset about it, so the mail stopped for a while, presumably because he wanted to end things, but my wife wasn't going to let him go. Eventually, I got the worst email of them all where she was telling him that she'd spoken to a friend of hers who is a lawyer, and she'd helped her file for divorce right after the baby is born. The reason she'd even tried to convince me to have a baby with her was so that she'd get both the alimony and the child support after the divorce so that she could take off with our neighbor a few months after and live happily ever after. I was horrified when I read that, and I can still feel the nauseating feeling take over me whenever I think about that email. Anyway, I quickly shook off whatever I was feeling and got back to work and took several pictures of the email on my phone before shutting it down and keeping it back where I'd found it. I was less concerned about the cheating and more disgusted by what my wife was trying to do. Cheating was one thing, but trying to trick me into having a child with her and then making me pay all that money just so she could fund her dream life with her struggling boyfriend was so psychotic. And the cherry on top was that she was such a great actress that I hadn't suspected a thing yet. Her happiness was almost disturbing, but I was so angry about all of this that I decided to go the extra mile and take my revenge. I made up my mind to play along, and then I dropped the bomb on her when she was least expecting it. There was no way I was going to let her just get away with it without feeling the hurt, betrayal, and frustration that I'd been feeling when I found out about her dishonesty. Call me a psycho, but I did what I had to do. So, for the next 9 months, I played the perfect husband/father-to-be. It was tough knowing that she was lying through her teeth to me all this while, but the more she lied and pretended to be happy with me, the more it strengthened my resolve to see this through. I attended every meeting with her doctor and made sure she took all her vitamins on time and was the best husband that one could ask for. Then, finally, a few days ago, my wife went into labor. I was extremely nervous because it wouldn't be in my situation, but I put that all aside and took her to the hospital all by myself. I called her parents already, but not mine since I didn't want them present there in case things became too dramatic. Anyway, her parents had to drive for an hour to get to the hospital, so we had some time to ourselves, and that's when I chose to drop the bomb on her. Once she was safely inside the room, I told her that I was going to go out and call our neighbor so he could be there for her. She looked taken aback and stuttered a bit while saying that there was no need for that, and she didn't want a stranger in the room while giving birth. So, I smiled back at her and showed her the results of my fertility test along with the divorce paper since I'd filed for divorce just a few days before her due date that I'd made sure to carry with me on that day. She went through all of it still looking confused. So I explained to her that I wouldn't be able to impregnate her even if I'd wanted to. So the baby wasn't mine. Then, I told her about the emails that I'd found on her super secret account, and at that moment, she finally realized what was going on. The look on her face was priceless as I walked out, and she struggled to come up with words. I thought I'd need to stay in the hospital myself too because that's how fast my heart was beating when I finally walked out and called our neighbor up to inform him that my wife was in labor. I didn't even wait for his response and hung up as fast as I could. Then, I got into my car and waited for my wife's family to show up. As soon as I saw her dad's car pull up in the driveway, I got out of there as fast as I could. I even turned my phone off for good measure and drove for a while until I got to this motel a little out of town. I packed my bags already a few weeks ago and had them stashed in the boot of my car, so that I had all that I needed with me and wasn't caught unprepared at any point. I spent the rest of the day watching television, drinking beer, and doing everything I possibly could to take my mind off of things. I went to sleep that night quite peacefully knowing that I was finally done and dusted with this whole act. The next morning, I woke up and finally turned my phone on. Naturally, there were hundreds of texts from my wife and my neighbor, none of which I bothered to even open, but I did go through some texts that my parents and brother had sent me. I guess my wife had probably contacted them when she couldn't reach me, so I decided to call my parents back and speak to them. I told them that I'd be coming back home in a while and even told them to get my brother there if possible so that I could explain the entire situation to them because they did deserve an explanation for what was happening. I drove to my parents' house, and my brother was already there. All of them were looking confused and kind of annoyed, which was but natural because to them I just missed the birth of my own child, and it also made them miss the birth of their grandchild. But I sat them down and explained the whole story to them and told them my reasons for what I'd done, and by the time I was done telling them, they were speechless. I was ready to be bombarded with questions and accusations, but nothing of the sort happened. All my dad said was that he hoped nothing worse would happen, and if the others had any other comments, they didn't say anything. So it was all chill on that front. That was a few days back, and while my family hasn't said much, my wife has gone above and beyond to accuse me of ruining her experience of becoming a mother for the first time. She's been trying to call me and text me ever since I left, but I haven't answered anything. Even my neighbor texted me a few hours ago saying that my wife was really upset and that we should keep our differences aside for her sake and at least try to sort things out with her for once. I can't believe the audacity that these people have, still trying to talk to me and make it seem like this is some petty thing that I'm getting pissed about. He mentioned a couple of other things as well in his text, like how my wife had started to fall back in love with me during her pregnancy, which had been a shock for both of them as well, so I should at least try to give our marriage a second chance. I called BS on it because if she'd started to fall for me again, then why was my neighbor still in the picture? I don't know why they think I'm that stupid. My wife is upset, but there's nothing I can do about it. She's mostly angry that I've known everything right from the beginning but had chosen to be with her and put up with this whole act and accused me of lying to her. I'd been staying with my wife throughout her pregnancy and misleading her despite knowing that the baby wasn't mine and she'd been cheating on me with our neighbor. Update 1. It's been close to a week since the baby was born, and I've been staying in a hotel room. I haven't been over to see my wife yet, and neither do I plan on going either. She's still texting and calling me, but I don't know why since I've made it pretty clear that I'm not interested in speaking to her or hearing her out. I haven't blocked her yet, but I have blocked my neighbor since he'd taken it upon himself to text me and remind me that my wife was still holding out hope and wanted me to get back to her. I'm 100% sure that the only reason he's still with her and trying to get me to forgive her is so that she'll at least get something out of the divorce settlement and the alimony since both of them are basically unemployed. My wife was a stay-at-home spouse, which I appreciated and respected, but she wasn't just staying at home and doing the chores. She was also cheating on me behind my back, and that was unforgivable. And before anyone attacks me, I'm not the one who suggested that she quit her job after marriage. In fact, I was quite supportive of her back when we were dating, and she used to work, but she's the one who said she wanted to quit and take care of our home instead. So I didn't stand against it either since it was her choice, and I earned well enough anyway. I'm pretty sure my lawyer will be able to get me out of paying alimony once we can prove that she'd been cheating, which I'm hoping is going to be easy. As for my neighbor, he's still struggling to find well-paying modeling gigs, so handling his own expenses, my wife's expenses, and a baby on top of that is going to be next to impossible for them even with all their money combined. So good luck to them. I'm just grateful that I'm out of this mess and won't have to give them anything, not even my attention. I just hope that my wife realizes that and doesn't waste any more of my time by contesting the divorce. I'm hoping she won't, but then again, given the utter lack of brains, she might as well, so I'm prepared for that as well. The pictures of the emails that had been exchanged on her secret email account are still safely saved on my phone and backed up on my laptop, so I'm not too worried. Even if she decides to delete her account, she cannot delete those images that I have, and I know I'll be good to go. Worst comes to worst, I'll even pay her the alimony, but at least I won't have to be with her. She should count herself lucky I'm giving her time to vacate our house by herself and having forcefully evicted her since the house is registered under my name. I'm hoping for the best now, and maybe this will blow over soon enough. Update 2. I was right. My wife's an idiot and has decided to negotiate since she wasn't happy with the settlement that I'd offered, which was basically just the amount that she'd spent during the course of the marriage, and even that felt pretty generous to me. I don't even understand what miracle she thinks is going to happen, but whatever, good for her. She texted me yesterday saying that she'd vacated the house today, and I went back happily thinking that she'd probably moved in with her parents or something, but was super disappointed to learn that she just moved across the street into our neighbor's house, and I'd still have to see her and her boyfriend's faces every single day now. I even considered going back to living in a hotel but didn't since this was my house, and I had every right to live wherever I wanted to. I wasn't gonna pack up and go just because they were gonna make me uncomfortable. I did wonder why my wife hadn't gone to live with her parents instead, since living with our neighbor was going to negatively impact the divorce case, and she was just making the situation worse for herself. But I didn't have to think too hard, because while scrolling through all the unread messages that I received from multiple people so far, I also noticed one from my wife's father. I hadn't responded to several people who had texted me in the past few days, and his message had also gotten lost in it. It was a long text about how sorry he was regarding what his daughter had done, and told me that they were strongly against her actions. Her father was saying these things, so it meant a lot to me and validated my emotions so much that I could feel tears coming on, but held back anyway. He apologized for my wife's behavior and told me that he'd cut her off, since she told him that she wanted to contest the divorce. So far, nothing that my wife was doing made any sense to me at all, since everything that she'd done was eventually going to backfire. And surely even someone like her had the good sense to realize that. Either she's just really stupid, or she still has some sick and twisted tricks up her sleeve. I'm hoping it's not the latter, but then I wouldn't put it past her. She is pretty much the worst. This living arrangement is definitely going to lead to some complications, and I'm sure they'll try to make me uncomfortable or jealous, but I'm determined not to let them get under my skin and provoke me, because they're definitely going to use that against me. All things considered, I'm still saving a fortune since I don't have to live in a hotel. So, it's been a month since the negotiations for my divorce settlement began, and so far, it's going pretty badly for my wife. I've been able to prove that she'd been cheating on me. Update 3. So, it's been a month since the negotiations for my divorce settlement began, and so far, it's going pretty badly for my wife. I've been able to prove that she'd been cheating on me, and she'd even made my job easier by moving in with the guy I'd accused her of cheating on me with, so there was no question about the validity of my claims. She tried to make up some false accusations about how I was an alcoholic, which is also why I was sterile, and that's why she'd gone ahead and had an affair. Since when we were trying to conceive, I'd become really cruel and bitter towards her. But that was all disproved quite easily, since everyone knew I'd quit drinking last year when we decided to start trying for a baby, and haven't touched alcohol since. Again, I don't know why she thought that would work, and it was pretty damn stupid on her part. I guess she was just grasping at straws, since her initial plan had failed miserably, and now she was too busy being a mother to be a scheming mastermind. She was too busy, and her baby daddy was too stupid, so there they were. By now, both of us are well aware of the fact that the chances of her walking away with any alimony at all are very slim, and I guess she must have told her boyfriend this, since a few days ago, she was quite unceremoniously kicked out of his house with her baby. Yeah, that's right. I heard a lot of screaming and shouting from their house, and then within minutes, I saw my wife and her son being pushed out of the house while the father screamed absolutely disgusting things about her and called her every name in the book. I was watching all of this happen from my living room, and the second I saw him shove my wife out while she was carrying the baby, I rushed out to help. Enmity be damned. I couldn't let a poor innocent baby suffer for something that isn't even his fault. By the time I reached his doorstep, he'd already slammed the door shut while my wife and her son were both sobbing. I carried the baby and grabbed my wife's hand so that I could lead them back to my house across the street, and then called my father-in-law up so that he could take her home. Within an hour, he showed up and took her away, once again thanking me for all that I'd done. During that 1 hour, my wife had been crying like a baby herself, so I'd basically been calming both mother and child down myself. I wanted to call the cops as well, but she managed to persuade me to let it go since she didn't want more trouble. She apologized again and again for whatever had happened and told me that she'd been so desperate to be with the one she loved that she lost all her self-respect and morals, and she was truly sorry about all of it. She told me she'll accept whatever happens and isn't going to negotiate anymore, so the divorce is finalized faster. I guess that's one good thing. I hope she decides to press charges eventually on this though and heals herself as well, but at least I did whatever I could and was a decent person, and I don't regret anything. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Before we start, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. I want to leave my husband, even though he tells me he loves me every day. I've been married to my husband for almost 8 years now, but I feel like I can't waste any more of my life being with him. He wants to keep fighting to save our relationship, but I don't feel like there's anything left to save. We were both raised in the same high-control religion that didn't want us dating and tried to force us apart on multiple occasions. I didn't feel like they had a right to get in the way of our relationship, so I got rebellious and just decided to elope with him because then they wouldn't be able to separate a married couple. However, after we eloped, they shut us out of the community, and we lost all of our friends and family. Contact became minimal. I felt like it was my husband and I against the world. I thought we would be strong enough together after fighting so hard to escape our toxic religious background. But things didn't quite work out that way. While I was trying to process my feelings and put the past behind me, he became consumed with hate and was constantly complaining. For the first couple of years, I put myself to work in order to provide for us while he was unemployed, gaming all day, and not doing any household chores. We decided together that we needed to pursue a higher education that would secure our financial freedom when we both got a decent-paying job afterward. I worked hard when it came down to my education. I had a paid internship and studied at the same time. My husband, on the other hand, put minimal effort into his studies and got several warnings about being kicked out due to his low attendance. With only one semester left, he ended up dropping out for mental health reasons. This was also my last semester, and I now had the added stress of him dropping out, his mental breakdown, my grandmother passing away, and my brother being terminally ill. It got so bad that I broke down in front of my boss and started crying because the pressure was so hard on me. I had gotten so far behind on everything that I didn't think I would make it. Thankfully, my boss was kind enough to help me through the rest of my studies so that I could graduate that summer and also gave me a full-time job at the same place right after. It's been almost a year and a half since my husband dropped out, and he's still wasting away his life at home doing nothing except gaming, drinking, and sleeping. I had to drag him to a psychiatrist after he kept talking about harming himself. After a line of sessions and medical treatment, they told us that he was no longer clinically depressed and recommended that he talk with a psychologist to work through any past traumas and also suggested he get a job as it would be good for him to get out of the house, but he's done none of that. During all of this, I've become extremely lonely in our marriage. When I told my husband that I was feeling overwhelmed by everything going on, he accused me of piggybacking on his depression in order to get attention. A few months ago, we had a huge fight, and during the heat of it, he admitted that he was so embarrassed about my physical appearance that he had canceled a gaming night at our place with some friends he met online. I was disappointed because how could he be embarrassed by the woman who supported him for all these years and fought so hard to get an education in order to provide us with a better life? He'd taken all of my efforts for granted, while the only thing he was busy doing was being a lazy slob with a drinking problem who couldn't even be bothered to contribute financially or help around the house. Ever since this argument, I've refused to tell him I love him and pulled away all affection. I began wondering if I'd be better off alone than in a marriage with someone who tells me he loves me but does nothing to show it. On top of all of this, my brother recently passed away, and we buried him last week. My husband hates how this has resulted in me spending more time with my family, who I had gone into low contact with since we left the religion. I don't know why my husband insisted on coming considering how vocal he was about hating my family, but he ended up drinking way too much, enough for people to notice on the way home. He started talking about how my deceased brother probably had some kid-loving tendencies, and I couldn't believe my ears. He was acting so disgusting towards my brother on the same day we buried him. When we got home, he continued his drinking and got angry with me, complaining about how he felt trapped in a loveless marriage. He gave me an ultimatum, telling me that I had to tell him right there that I loved him or it was over between us. I wasn't in the mood for his empty threats, so I told him to sleep on the couch that night. The next day, I stopped on the way home to buy moving boxes in order to show him just how seriously I took his threat. He was in total disbelief and called his mother, who came over and tried to smooth things over. For the past week since then, he's been extremely nice and acting like nothing happened. He won't stop hugging or kissing me and telling me he loves me. It honestly feels like he's love-bombing to convince me to stay, but I'm currently looking for an apartment, and my family is on standby to help me move whenever I find a place. I feel like a bad person for leaving him while he's depressed, but I also feel like 8 years is a long time to wait for him to get his life together. I can't keep pushing back my own issues and constantly put a brave face on both of us. I'm too tired for that. I feel like I deserve to be selfish now for once in my life and take care of myself. Update. I want to leave my husband, even though he tells me he loves me every day. After avoiding each other for around a week and not speaking, we finally sat down and talked it out. I made it clear to him that I had made up my mind and that I was going to divorce him while also choosing to move out. He was surprisingly calm and said he understood why I felt that way. In his opinion, he believed I was making a mistake, and he wanted us to work it out, but he didn't blame me for wanting to leave him. The days following our talk were tougher on me than I had anticipated. Instead of avoiding each other, he was being incredibly nice to me, and we were able to have somewhat normal conversations. It made me remember how things used to be, and it was hard to fight back tears. Even now as I write this, I can't hold back my tears. I really did love him, and I thought he was the one I was going to grow old with. It's been a very tough decision to leave him and actually go through with it, but I knew I had to be strong. Instead of doubting myself, I knew he wasn't going to change if I stayed. I was lucky to find a great apartment within walking distance from my work where I could move in with very short notice. My mother and one of my brothers had both lent me half of the money for the deposit since I hadn't been able to put any money aside while having to support my husband. A few days before I moved out, I filed for our divorce online in my country. We have the option to get divorced directly without any separation period if both parties agree on it and can agree on how to split assets. I didn't really care about any of the stuff in our home and would rather just get it over with instead of giving him a reason to fight me on it. So I just suggested that I take everything I brought with me when we got married and a few big items I was the only one who used. I don't know if he would have made things more difficult if I asked for more, but it wasn't worth the risk to ask. He agreed to my conditions and we filed for divorce. After a month of processing time, we got our divorce papers, and I'm now officially divorced. I have a long amount of healing ahead of me, but I have no doubt in my mind that I made the right decision. I've been spending a lot of time with my family after having been in low contact for so many years. Not long before all of this happened, my oldest brother had passed away after being sick for such a long time. He was really looking forward to meeting our first nephew, the son of our youngest brother, but he never got the chance considering that he passed on the same night the baby was born in the same hospital. I don't really care that much for babies and can't see myself wanting one of my own. My nephew is so precious to me. Whenever I hold him in my arms, it makes me feel like everything is going to be okay. It may sound a bit cliché, but I'm spending time finding myself in my place in this world. I feel love and support for my family, so even though I'm not married anymore, I don't really feel as alone as I did when I was married. As for my ex, we still keep in touch in our own friendly terms. He seems to be doing better. Our divorce has forced him out of his comfort zone to be able to take care of himself. He tells me he still hopes that one day, maybe years from now, we'll find our way back together. Although I wish we could start over and make it work, real life doesn't work like that. We'd fall back into our old habits, and the pattern would repeat itself. So all we can do now is move on and wish each other the best. Now on to the next story. Story 3. Alright, so let's say I've got this younger brother, Jake, right? And for some weird reason, he's just not into me. You might guess, could it be jealousy? But nah, that's not it. In our house, if there's a favorite, it's definitely Jake, not me. So jealousy is off the table. Here's the scoop. My mom practically rolls out the red carpet for Jake. She cooks his favorite meals, keeps his clothes spotless, and she even nudges me to help him with his homework. It's like, because he's my brother, I'm expected to be on call for him. But when I need a hand, it's like I'm talking to the walls. Nobody's rushing to help me out. I kind of just shrugged it off and didn't kick up a fuss. I'm pretty self-reliant, so I figured, hey, what's the harm in playing along? Maybe I thought things would somehow balance out. But here's the thing. Jake barely ever lifts a finger to help me. He only pops up when he needs something from me. So growing up, I was the quiet type who liked to stick to my books and just do my own thing. My brother, on the other hand, was a lot like my dad. Pretty loud and always in the middle of some action. I've always been the kind of person who says what I think straight up, without making things sound nicer than they are. I guess because of this, my mom started to see me in a not-so-great light. And yep, you guessed it, this made my brother the golden boy in everyone's eyes. Back then, I didn't really care much about all that. But things got a bit rough when he decided it was fun to pick on me for being different. He'd make fun of my height, tease me about my glasses, and even sneak into my room to read my diary. Then he'd go off and tell my mom about anything I wrote down. It felt like he was always looking for ways to make me the odd one out. Whenever he crossed the line, like sneaking into my space or messing with my stuff, I'd lose it and go straight to our parents, hoping they'd see my side. But nope, they just waved it off, chuckling about how it wasn't a big deal. Things got worse, though. He almost wrecked my glasses once and even messed with my food one time. He put pebbles in my stereo. Luckily, I caught that one in time, or it could have ended badly for my teeth. I tried talking to my mom about it, thinking maybe she'd get how serious this was, but she just shrugged it off with a, "That's how brothers bond." Every time Jake and I would get into it, he knew exactly which buttons to press, hitting all my insecurities hard. And since we went to the same school, he knew all about the kids who were bullying me. Instead of having my back, he'd side with them, making things even tougher for me. He took things way too far, joining in with those bullies at school, calling me awful names like the ugly loser or hey monkey. He even egged them on to get physical with me, all because he saw me as nothing but a big failure. There was this one time we got into an argument over something so trivial I can't even remember what it was about, but what I do remember is how it ended with him telling me to kill myself. Most insults I could shake off, but not that one. It hit me hard because I was already dealing with some pretty tough stuff mentally at that time. Thankfully, I'm in a much better place now, but back then, it was devastating to think my own brother wanted me gone. With Dad always at work and Mom not really tuning into how serious things were, it felt like I was on my own. Once, Mom even told me off, saying it was my fault for provoking him. Things just kept getting worse as we got older. There was this one crazy moment in high school when he actually tried to burn my hair. Can you believe that? And to make matters even more unbelievable, my mom actually took his side, saying he was just playing around. I mean, who does that kind of stuff for fun? Luckily, that was the moment my dad stepped in. He was not having any of it and made it clear that this behavior was way out of line. He even went as far as threatening to call the police on Jake, which was a huge wake-up call for him. Until that point, it seemed like he could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, so this was a major shock to him. My dad didn't stop there. He sat Jake down and laid it out straight. Enough was enough, and it was high time he started showing some respect towards me, his older brother. Then something I never expected happened. My dad came to talk to me in my room. It was surprising because all through our growing up, he'd always been pointing out how similar he and Jake were, which was pretty much true. When my dad told me he had been waiting for Jake to outgrow his immaturity and didn't realize until now that he was actually becoming a big bully, it was like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Finally, someone saw what I was going through and believed me. I nearly cried from relief. I poured out my heart to him, telling him all the things Jake had done and how I was also being bullied at school. Dad was really taken aback by everything I had been enduring. The very next day, he made a point to talk to the principal at our school to ensure that my bullies knew they'd face serious consequences if they kept it up. But he didn't stop there. That evening, he signed me up for mixed martial arts classes at the local gym. He said it was time for me to man up and learn how to stand up to the bullies in my life. It was a whole new chapter for me, one where I started to learn not just how to defend myself, but also to build confidence in who I am. Sure, at first glance, someone might have thought it was pretty funny seeing a nerdy kid like me trying to get the hang of fighting in those mixed martial arts classes. But here's the thing. I get super focused when I really want to learn something new. So I made sure to squeeze in time for working out and attending those classes, even with all my studying. And let me tell you, it wasn't just for kicks. It totally transformed both my life and my body. I'm not trying to boast, but the difference was night and day. Then there was this one day when Jake decided to pull his old tricks again. This time, he swiped my pocket money, the cash I'd earned by helping out our parents with chores around the house. I'd been saving up for quite a while, and he just snuck into my room and took it. I caught him just as he was about to take off on his bike with his friends. I stood my ground and demanded my money back, making it clear to him that stealing was wrong, fully expecting him to push back or make a run for it. Jake, thinking he could get under my skin as usual, just snickered and threw that old taunt my way, saying all I ever did was run to Dad for help. Something just snapped in me at that moment, and before I knew it, I had landed a solid punch right on his face. He was so shocked that he stumbled and fell backward onto the ground. Quickly, I grabbed him, fished my money out of his pocket, and then, without a second thought, I let him fall back down. The sight of him crying on the ground, loud and clear like a little kid, was almost funny. There he was, a teenage boy bawling over being hit. But then my mom came dashing out, all worried, ready to scoop up her baby boy and find out what had gone down. When she realized I had actually stood up to him and we had fought, she was more than just shocked. She started scolding me, probably not expecting me to ever fight back like that. My mom laid into me, saying that, as the older brother, I was supposed to be setting a good example for Jake. All the while, Jake seemed to get a kick out of seeing me get a talking to. My mom didn't stop by just scolding me. She brought it to my dad's attention too, complaining about how I'd thrashed Jake and suggesting I needed to be reined in. My dad, with this serious look he gets, called us both to lay out what had happened. I laid it all out for my dad. How Jake had sneaked into my room and taken the money I'd earned and saved. Jake, on his part, tried to spin some story about needing the money for a date and that, as his brother, I should have been willing to help him out. But Dad wasn't having any of it. He told Jake straight up that he was lucky all he got was a punch for stealing. In the real world, stealing could land him in much hotter water, like having the police called on him. My dad made it crystal clear to Jake that taking things without permission was absolutely not okay, driving home the point that respect and consent are non-negotiable. Jake really didn't take well to being called out by Dad. He tried throwing a fit, probably hoping Mom would take his side like usual. But this time, Dad stood his ground, making it clear he wasn't about to let Jake off easy. Seeing that there was no way he was going to win this one and that I wasn't going to be punished for standing up to him, Jake lost it. He shouted how much he hated me and stormed off to his room, slamming the door shut behind him. From that day on, Jake kept his distance from me. It seemed like he finally got the message that he couldn't mess with me anymore, especially now that Dad wasn't playing favorites. For the first time, I felt like we were on equal footing. Jake might have stopped trying to physically intimidate me, but he didn't give up on being a pain. Whenever he knew we were out of earshot of our parents, he'd still throw verbal jabs my way. It seemed like as he got older, his words only got sharper and meaner. It felt like each year he became angrier and had a shorter fuse. If I approached him to ask something, he would simply ignore me to my face and walk away out of the room, calling me a nerd or a loser under his breath. If he wanted to say something to me, he would only go through Mom, who would relay the message. I would question my mother as to why Jake could not just talk to me if he wanted something, and she would implore me to be more understanding. I had no clue if this was just him going through puberty and I had to wait it out, or if he actually truly hated me. I used to be able to deal with the things he would say over the years, but it got to a point where I just wanted to move out of home to get away from him. I would go to my mother countless times, asking if she could mediate a sit-down conversation for all of us to talk it out, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. I even asked for her opinion on why he treated me that way, but she would just brush off the question. Eventually, I went away to my dream university. Since I was a grade A student and was even qualified for a scholarship, my dad threw a party for me, and my mom seemed proud of me too. However, Jake remained aloof and distant, barely acknowledging my achievements. The day I left for university was a mix of excitement for the future and relief to escape the toxic environment at home. The first few months at the university were liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and started to build a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere I had experienced growing up. The constant fear of Jake's verbal attacks lifted, and I felt a newfound sense of peace. I began dating my wife, Karen, when we were both in the second year of our university. My friend introduced us at a frat party, and we clicked right away. Coming from a religious family, having kids without being married was a big no-no. However, we found out she was pregnant when we were in the last year of our university, which prompted us to get married as soon as we graduated. Our wedding was a small but peaceful ceremony. Our parents were happy for us, and we had a good time at our wedding. At that moment, I believe she was the love of my life. I always held the mindset that I wanted monogamy in life, one woman to come home to and be with for the long haul. Despite women trying to engage with me over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content in my marriage. Karen was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, over the years, there were 2 occasions when I discovered she was being unfaithful in our marriage. One was an ongoing affair that lasted a few years with her married coworker, and the other was a fling with an ex she had dated in high school when she went to visit her family states away. I'm sure there will be people who might call me foolish, and looking back, I can't really deny it myself. After a period of separation in both situations, I made the decision to forgive my wife. I never wanted to raise my child in a broken home, and I genuinely believed we could overcome these challenges. We were quite young when the situation with her coworker occurred, so I chalked it up to youthful mistakes and not thinking things through. For a while, things seemed okay with us. I could never fully trust her, but I tried my best to push aside my doubts because I knew that if I chose to forgive her, I had to work towards moving past it and starting with a clean slate. It's been 4 years since the second time she was unfaithful, and I felt like I made the right decision by giving her a chance to show that she still wanted to be in our marriage. For years, Karen seemed to have changed, and we were genuinely happy, with plans set in motion for the future of our family. However, 3 months ago, my reality was once again shattered by yet another incident, which in my mind was far worse than the others. When she revealed that she had been sleeping with someone for quite some time and suggested that our son might not even be mine. Hearing her words, I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. A mix of shock, betrayal, and disbelief overwhelmed me. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of what she had just disclosed. In a daze, I managed to ask her why she had kept such a significant secret and how she could have done something so devastating. Her reaction was a cold and indifferent demeanor. She seemed detached, almost unbothered by the pain she had inflicted. Her responses were vague, leaving me with more questions than answers. It was a surreal and painful moment, confronting the shattered trust and the uncertainties about my own family. I continued to ask Karen to tell me the truth because I felt like I deserved to know the father of the child since I had been literally raising our son since the beginning. In the end, she admitted that it was Jake. My eyes widened in shock as I asked her what exactly she meant by that. This is when Karen told me how she and Jake had become friends back when I had introduced Karen to my family, and she had stayed with us for Thanksgiving up until New Year's. I remember Jake, who was usually cold to me, was quite polite and warm towards her. I was glad since I did not want to make Karen feel unwelcome. She wanted to be accepted into my family, so she would spend significant time hanging out with my mom whenever she could. She noticed that Jake and I were not that close and questioned me about it. I finally opened up to her about my childhood equation with Jake and told her how we might never be able to repair our relationship since he never could move past his feelings. Karen understood, however. She started to include Jake whenever we would go out, perhaps hoping that both of us would warm up to each other. If we were going to watch a movie, she would invite Jake, and then we would have to watch whatever movie Jake wanted to watch. I guess during this time, Jake and I did talk a few words here and there, which was a significant improvement compared to how he had been giving me the silent treatment for years. I do remember Karen and Jake would hang out and play video games together, but I never thought much about it. Karen told me how one day, Jake opened up to her about his struggles and his recent breakup with his then ex-girlfriend. He seemed so vulnerable with her, and they struck a friendship. She said how he would sometimes harmlessly flirt with her when I was not around, and apparently one thing led to another, and she could not control herself anymore. I closed my eyes as the vision of my wife and brother sleeping together almost made me puke. She told me how guilty she felt after that and ran away from him after that. She decided to go back home, which was true because my girlfriend had abruptly told me how she wanted to go back home when I thought she would be spending New Year's with me. I tried to convince her to stay, but she was adamant that she had to go. After the holidays, when we met in college once our classes resumed, she was back to her usual cheerful self, so I never questioned anything. 2 weeks after that, we found out that she was pregnant. Now, Karen told me that she had no idea whether it was really my child or Jake's, and she had no way to find proof because I was already stepping up. She knew out of the two I was a more dependable brother, so she decided to stay with me, and this is why we got married. I felt like my whole world was crashing down around me. The son I had loved and spent countless hours with may not even be mine. I questioned her if she had been sleeping with Jake in the present times, and she nodded slowly. Karen told me how she and Jake had always stayed in touch because their chemistry was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotel rooms when she would lie to me that she was working overtime. She told me how half of her business trips were just romantic getaways with him. I asked Karen why she would even be married to me if she really wanted my brother, but Karen told me how she did not want to be the one to break off a marriage, and seeing how I was such a wonderful father to our son, she had stayed with me all this while. In her words, she had made a mistake, and she didn't know when to stop. I simply told Karen that I was glad that she told me the truth and that I was going to pack up and move out. Karen started to cry and asked for my forgiveness, telling me how I was supposed to scream and yell at her, but here I was calmly thinking of my next move. I remained quiet while I walked to my cupboard and started packing some of my clothes into my suitcase. Karen kept saying how if I really loved her, then I should try to at least fight for her, and mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized that I was not going to do anything, she changed her tactic and told me how my son would be affected if we got a divorce and how children should not be brought up in a broken home. I reminded her how I may not even be a father, which then reduced her to tears, and she started to yell at me about being cruel and how I could easily walk away when I'd been there for the child since his birth. It seemed like my wife believed there was nothing that could make me want out of our marriage. I guess it was partly my fault for letting things slide in the past. While I did have some love for her, it felt more like it stemmed from the fact that I thought we had a son together and had been together since college. Karen continued to claim that it was not too late and that we could work things out, but I struggled to believe it and felt like I had no more patience to deal with her. Trust was a major issue for me, and her words felt empty. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget that she had slept with my own brother. I've always believed that people could make mistakes and be forgiven because we are all flawed, but this went beyond a certain limit. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and told them everything about my wife's affair with Jake and how they had been sleeping together for years behind our backs. The shock on their faces was evident. My mother, true to her nature, initially tried to defend Jake, telling me that this could not be true since her boy would never do something like this to his own brother. Determined to expose the truth, I requested my parents to remain silent and allow me to call Jake right in front of them. I told them to not make a sound since this is how I could expose Jake's true colors. I wanted him to think that it was just a private conversation between us so that he could hopefully let his guard down. As Jake picked it up, I laid it on to him and confronted him with the revelation of his affair with my wife. Initially, he denied it vehemently and refused to accept it. Then, when I told him that Karen had admitted to everything, he started to blame Karen, labeling her as characterless. He told me that it was not his fault if women were attracted to him and that he was the better-looking brother. I told him firmly that I was going to expose him in front of everyone. When Jake mocked that no one would believe me and that he was the golden child anyway, I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth since our parents had heard everything. Jake went quiet and then spluttered to explain himself, stumbling over his words in an attempt to salvage his image. My mother, still grappling with the shock, demanded an explanation from Jake. He started through a feeble attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, who was once protective of her favored son, now felt a mix of disappointment and anger. In that charged moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years, I had endured Jake's torment. Now, the truth would come to light, and the roles were reversed. It was Jake who stood exposed, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As Jake's words faltered, my father, usually reserved in his expressions, couldn't contain his disappointment. He asked me to pass him the phone and went off on Jake. Jake, he began, his tone heavy with disapproval. What you've done is not just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued to sleep with her after they got married. Your actions have consequences, and they have irreversibly damaged the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and decency. What you've shown today goes against everything I've tried to instill in you. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on Jake's conscience. The disregard for your brother's feelings, the lack of respect for the sanctity of his marriage, It's unacceptable. You've not only hurt him but tarnished the bonds that hold us together as a family. I feel like me and your mom ought to be blamed for what you have become now, and we will no longer let you get away with this behavior anymore. Starting today, I'm cutting you off from the college funds that I set up for you. You can figure out on your own about your university fees. I will also not be funding your lifestyle anymore. Do you think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Well, now let's see what happens to you when you don't have my money to depend on. I, on the other hand, maintained a composed demeanor throughout all of this. Although I initially wanted to scream at Jake, watching my dad punish him was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear that he had underestimated the consequences. Jake, persistent in his protests, continued to justify himself, but my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down Jake's attempts to explain away his actions. My mom came up to me and hugged me. It had been a while since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace, there was unspoken understanding and support amid the family turmoil. She apologized to me that she had not believed me all this time. I felt like my 14-year-old self would never have imagined this moment, being vindicated and embraced by my mother. After that, my dad helped me find a good lawyer so I could divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to fight dirty by asking me for alimony since I earned more than her, but luckily, her affair played heavily in my favor. We also had a paternity test for my son, and it was determined that Jake was indeed the father of the child. I can't begin to write how painful it was for me to digest this news. It was worse than when Karen told me that she had been cheating on me. I felt so pissed that my son didn't belong to me. However, I guess God works in mysterious ways because I decided to stay strong throughout all this. Karen begged me that I should keep visiting my son since he should not be punished for all of this. But I just could not bear to see him. He reminded me of Jake, and I hated it. After my divorce was finalized, I was finally free. I moved into my own bachelor pad. It felt surreal living on my own since I had gotten married so young and never really lived on my own. However, since I had always been independent, I was quick to adapt to my bachelor lifestyle and I honestly loved it. 2 weeks ago, my dad called me to let me know that he had been thinking of changing his will since he didn't want to give Jake anything. If there's one thing to know about my dad, it is that he is extremely stubborn. Since he had made up his mind that he wanted nothing to do with Jake, he had kept his word. Jake tried to reach out to our parents and even showed up at their doorstep, begging them for forgiveness, but he was not even allowed inside. My mother, who usually caves into Jake's tantrums, also seems to be done with him, although it must be hurting her the most throughout all of this. Jake didn't even once send me a text to apologize for what he had done. So clearly, he didn't even regret it. He was just sad about being cut off from our parents. Well, Dad told me that he would be leaving everything behind to me, just to ensure that Jake doesn't protest later. He would be leaving him with only $1. My eyes widened in shock as my dad had worked really hard his whole life, including his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance. It would come up to almost $2 million. The only clause in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue to live in their house, even though the ownership would go to my name. Of course, I didn't mind this since I would want to take care of my mom until her last days. I don't know how, but Jake found out about all this. And since he can't reach my parents, he called me yesterday, trying to mend things right between us. He told me how he had been having trouble keeping up with college, and that after Karen had found out about the paternity of the child, she had been pestering him about child support. He told me that he had no money and was looking for part-time jobs, yet could not find anything. He begged me to talk to our families so we could start fresh since he really needed my help. I started to laugh at his face and told him that I was so done with him, that he should have thought about all this before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. Jake started to argue that I was being unfair and that she was to blame also, to which I agreed and reminded him how I did divorce her, and now she was his responsibility, so he should not be calling me complaining about her or her child since this was the consequence of his own actions. Jake started to raise his voice, but I cut him off and reminded him that he was no longer the favorite child in the family, but the black sheep who slept with his own brother's wife. Jake started to cry at this point and told me how everyone had been sitting on him, including our grandparents and relatives, which was true, but this was no longer my concern. I told him that we were done, then to never call me again since I was no longer his brother. Since then, I have been replaying the conversation over and over in my head. Although I hate my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we grew up. I won't lie, but it did hurt me a bit that he was this helpless. So I guess I am here to ask if I should talk to our parents about him, or would I be an a-hole if I don't? Date 1. Hi everyone. A lot of you have been asking me why I am no longer in contact with my son, Henry. Some of you have also called me cruel. Well, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't feel comfortable raising another man's child. This is not a stepson scenario. In this case, I was led to believe that he was my son, and then I discovered that he was in fact my brother's son. Of course, I am hurt, and I have cried over it for days. But then, the reason I don't want any contact with Henry is because I no longer want Karen in my life. If I talk to her child, she will find a way to snake her way into my life again, and I need my own space. You can call me cruel or selfish, but I can't see him again, or at least until a very long time. Update 2. Most of you have correctly guessed that it was in fact my mother who told Jake about my dad changing his will, and he called me as a last resort to mend things. I did confront her in front of my dad, and she broke down. She told me how I had punished Jake enough and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told my mother that if she felt what Jake did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her since he could never forgive him for his betrayal. His flat seemed to shut my mother up. My dad made it clear to her that if she ever talked with Jake and we found out, then she could pack her bags and just leave. Like I said, my dad is a very stubborn guy. Hopefully, my mother will learn from her mistakes. Update 3. Hi everyone. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved in the last couple of months. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he behaves with me more like a buddy than my own father. My mother, even though she misses Jake, has stayed away from him. The last I heard about Jake was from my cousin, who told me how Jake had been asking everyone for money and in the end had to drop out of college when he could not afford to pay his fees anymore. He and Karen are living together, and he even has a job as a part-time mechanic, apparently. I think they are raising Henry together, which is a good thing, I guess. I never bring up Jake in my discussions with my parents, and neither do they. So everyone asking, I'm doing quite well. I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has improved significantly. I haven't been dating anyone since I feel like I need time and space to heal. I've been going for a few therapy classes, so I guess we will see how that works out. Now on to the next story. Story 4. My mom abandoned us, so we abandoned her. Back when I was 18, I found out my mom was messaging someone online who lived in another state. One day, she decided to fly over there and meet him. She was supposed to stay for a week, and at first, I thought it was awesome that I'd have the whole house to myself. But then 1 week turned into 2, then 3, then eventually it had been a month since I last saw my mom. Everyone kept asking me when she'd be back, but she never gave a definitive answer. After about 2 months, I got a call from her telling me that she was staying over there and that I was now in charge of the house, which meant I had to pay all the bills by myself. I refused, but she insisted I pay them since she was no longer living here. I told her she needed to come back and do something with the house because it was under her name and not my responsibility. After that, she hung up on me and wouldn't answer my calls or texts, no matter how many times I tried to reach her. I ended up packing my things and went to my dad's house. When the bills started rolling in, she sent me all the links to payment sites, but I ignored them. When she saw I didn't end up paying them, she called me screaming, telling me I was irresponsible and then I'd get in trouble for not paying them. I told her once again that those bills weren't my responsibility, especially since I was already living with Dad now. She said she hoped I end up homeless on the streets and hung up. She tried to get other family members to pay the bills, but because she didn't want to sell the house, she gave up and ended up coming back in order to sell the house. At the time she was here, we barely had any contact, and when she eventually moved back to be with her new boyfriend, we talked even less. I only knew how her life was going through social media. Our family was devastated that she had abandoned us, and although it took some time, we were able to move on. It's been 5 years since she left, and I recently got a message from her asking if she and the new family she created could come stay with me. She went to a couple of other family members first but was rejected each time. Apparently, she has no support system over there and needs help because she's a stay-at-home mom and her husband got fired. They're having trouble making ends meet and want to stay with someone until they get back on their feet. I rejected her as well, saying I had no room and also wanted nothing to do with her. That didn't go over well, and now she's blasting our family on social media, saying we're abandoning her in her time of need. It's ridiculous that she doesn't see the irony in her own words. She texted us nonstop saying how we have a duty as her family to help, but I explained we didn't know her anymore because the day she abandoned us was the day she lost her family. She told her husband, and now he won't stop sending us texts about what an awful family we've been. We've since blocked them. 2 weeks have passed, but things have been silent on her end. We have reached the end. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comment section. Thank you and see you in the next video.